Somebody's on the air. Stand by. I'm car 7.
Fire to Battalion 3.
Okay, car 7.
Got fire showing. First, second floor, 2.5-story wood frame.
Okay, welcome to another edition of the First 2 Battalion Chief. I'm Danny Sheridan. With me is District Chief Erik Petaway from Boston. How's it going, Erik?
Hey Dan, how you doing today?
Hot. hot.
Yeah.
So so let's talk about taxpayers and we'll roll into towel ladders a little bit. Do you I'm wondering if Boston and New York or any other cities actually refer to these as taxpayers, because I always thought it came from New York City back in the turn of the century, 1900, the 1900s, when the city was growing and people didn't have actually money to build big buildings, so they put this temporary type 3, 1-story, maybe sometimes 100 by 50, it could be as big as a city block, and it was just basically, as the name implies, taxpayer. How did it kind of evolve in Boston? Would it be the same thing, Erik?
Yeah, I believe the term does come out of New York, the actual taxpayer definition. But as long as I've been on, and my dad before me, they were taxpayers. So I think it's just something that probably the terminology morphed and came up here at some point. I couldn't tell you when, and I don't think anyone could. But we do. We still have a lot of ones like in the picture that are still open for business, maybe a little long in the tooth. They've been slowly replacing them because if you could see the brick building behind it, on the other street, Dorchester Ave, that was a bar room, a 1-story bar room that they tore down to build like 6 stories.
Got it. Yeah, that was the intention.
Yeah, that's the trend now. Is like, I probably before I retire, someone will want to tear down this one and build a commercial, residential over commercial.
They absolutely will. And here's something I want to clarify. And guys make this mistake all the time. When they see or hear of a fire in a store, regardless if it's a 1-story, 2-story, or if it's a 6-story building, if the fire is in a store, they'll say, hey, 1075, we got a fire in a taxpayer. See, what happens when you say taxpayer to the chief, myself, and you, there's a whole different mindset going, because taxpayers are like, generally, if we don't get it early, they're going to go through additional alarms, But where I worked, when I was in 17 truck down in the South Bronx, we had a lot of commercial occupancies inside the 5-story tenements, and it sounds like it's semantics, but it's not, because I think early on in the operation, we really have to set the stage. And part of that is a 13-point size up, right? Coal was wealth, and construction and occupancy, basically occupancy. If you call a store fire in a 6-story or a 5-story a taxpayer, right? You're really not painting a good picture, because the occupancy designation is determined by what takes up most of the square footage or most of the area of the occupancy of the building. And I'm just saying, I know it sounds petty, but I hear it all the time. Like I've heard this, like, all right, so-and-so engine, so-and-so to the Bronx, 1075, we got a fire, 5-story taxpayer,
Yeah.
Just, those of us that have been around for a long time can read through that, but, just
it's very,
yeah.
You're correct about terminology can be very important, especially that in the beginning. Like this, when I put it out there that where we're going to talk a little about tower ladders, someone brought up that where they're from, they call almost everything a taxpayer, even if there's floors above. And I'm like, that's not what a taxpayer is. And he agreed. And I think sometimes people are reading the books and articles and they're trying to fit the term into something. But to me, it's always going to be something like this, a 1-story building for commercial until the land gets more valuable. Anything
Absolutely.
with
Absolutely.
residential above, or even these small office buildings. Those aren't taxpayers.
Yeah.
And especially when you have residential, you really don't want to use the term taxpayer, because now you got a different mindset than if it's a 6-story tenement with a store on the first floor, you know?
Right. And like you hit the nail on the head. In parts of New York City that are undergoing these major changes, so to speak, where the real estate values are skyrocketing, like in parts of Brooklyn and parts of Queens, Long Island City, uh, in the Bronx, where they want to build a new high rise. Sometimes they expect the fire department to do their demolition, if you know what I mean. They figured torch it and let the fire department, let them tear it down. And
One day,
we hope that people wouldn't do that, but
yeah, I
it
tell you,
happens.
that you said that. One day maybe we'll have this guest. I know some retired guys, and there was one particular demo company that if you saw their truck in front of the building in the morning, you were going to work that night. It was like clockwork.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
right.
and to hear the stories, and it's funny because, as you know, like during the war years, busy years everywhere, it really seemed like nobody cared. Everyone just torched everything. But getting back to this,
Right.
so one of the biggest things of taxpayers, um, they're always significant, but late at night or weekend, if like this particular one, um, most of that block is closed on Sunday, but one of them isn't. And each store has been kind of like the basement reflects the store, but it's not, it's just sheetrock in the basement, no fire stopping. So the big thing, like you said earlier, is if you pull up to this at, I don't know, 2 in the morning and you got heavy smoke pushing, I mean, right away, you're probably talking at least a second alarm. And myself personally, and I like to think it's because I have a half a brain, or it might be because I was on a tower like you.
Right.
But one of the first things I start thinking is, all right, if I'm gonna need a tower ladder, where I'm already thinking about where I'm gonna try to get the best positioning for them. Because one thing I have noticed over the years is sometimes people think like you can't move the engine because, oh, we were here. No, you could take the 5 minutes, shut it down, move it, because that tower ladder is going to put out way more fire
Hmm.
than your hand line's going to put. I don't think of times you were in the bucket. I can remember like, especially like a 3-decker where it blow over interior walls like it was nothing.
Hmm.
Uh, even even a commercial building, you get up there 100 psi plus, you're blowing walls over. And
Yeah,
I
exactly.
believe personally, in a taxpayer fire like that, the tower ladder properly placed is one of the best tools ever invented for firefighters.
Right. So
And
let's pause for a second, if you don't mind, Eric. Let's create a scenario here. Okay. Let's say we just got a report for heavy smoke in this, taxpayer, whatever it is, and let's say we'll look at the coal as well, right? So if coal
Mhm.
as well, we're talking about the construction. It's type 3, right? I'm assuming it's type 3. I see the brick
Yep,
and I know it's wood interior.
yep.
Occupancy, it's commercial. Area, I want to say the area, what would your guess be? 100? I'm not really good.
This one here is about 100
70,
by,
50 maybe?
uh, yeah, it's not a significant one, and it goes a little deeper than maybe a normal one.
Right.
And so what you don't see in the picture is, in that left is an alley, and then the overhead train runs right there. Like I'm standing under the bridge when I took the picture.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Oh, that's good to know.
So the
So
red
that
line runs right over it.
that becomes part of our size up. So with
Yeah, the
the
location.
so the L would be, let's say, the life hazard. I'm guessing I see lights on, so it might be nighttime, twilight, or it's after closing
Yeah.
hours. So my guess is There is no life hazard, but I'm gonna table that for a second because we can't always assume because things are buttoned up like this in a taxpayer that there's no life.
Yep.
Um,
Correct.
Water supply, I'm assuming because it's Boston, there's hydrants around.
Oh, tons.
Yep. Apparatus and equipment. So your typical assignment, wherever your town is, mine for this one would be on an initial box would be 3 and 2 and a battalion chief. If it was a 1075 on arrival, we would go with the 4 engines, let's say 2 trucks, a fast truck, a rescue squad, another battalion chief, and a deputy chief. The street conditions, I'm glad you mentioned that about the overhead because that could come into play in at some point on the Bravo side
Correct.
with the overhead, right?
Correct.
Let's say the weather. Well, I'm seeing snow on the ground, so I know it's cold out. So it's got to be 32 or below at least, right?
Yep.
I'm saying no exposures. I'm guessing the building behind there on the Charlie side is probably separated by a street. So I'm not going to consider that an exposure problem. Let's say auxiliary appliances. I don't see any fire department connections for sprinklers or standpipes, so I'm going to say none. No. Location of the fire to be determined, which we're going to talk about when we do our tactics. The time, again, I guess it's sometime after closing time. And the height, it's a 1-story, right? So
Correct.
That would be our size up. That's what we got. So let's just say we got heavy smoke coming out of the, well, what is it now? I can't read that. It says a hair salon.
Hair salon. Dental something.
Oh, yeah. So there's
and the last part,
4 occupancies. Yeah.
Correct, because the dental takes up the middle 2, I won't say middle, but 2 out of. So here's something I want to point out too is if you notice, some of the grates don't go to the ground.
Right.
But as I know personally, they're in poor condition, and that's as far as they go down.
Uh-huh.
So it really, I don't know, I wouldn't call it the most secure, but I would say, regardless of where the fire was at, one of the first assignments would be to get all those grates up and out of the way.
That's a great point, Eric. And I was just going to say that when you one of the first things you want to do besides locating the fire, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but as far as for a truck company, when you want to do forcible entry, you want to get all those gates off because you're going to need them anyway at some point. So let's get them off in the beginning. And what's going to happen, depending on how you want to tackle these locks, I always like the slash cut, and then you pull the slats out. Some guys like to do the triangle cut. The triangle, just remember this, when you're doing forcible entry and you start doing this triangle cut, you're going to eat up that blade. You're going to eat up a lot of blade with that triangle cut. That's why I like the slash cut, because you hit that slash cut and then you kind of use the point end of the Halligan and you pull out the slats, and then half of it will go up and the rest of it will go down. And one thing to consider, since it's cold out, and I've seen this numerous times, once those slats start laying in front of the store and it's cold out and we start using water, we're going to have a big ice hazard. And I've seen them.
Correct.
I've seen it become like a skating rink in front of that store, So that would be a good truck op. Someone's got to get on the roof and give us a report.
Correct.
I'm in front of the building, and I don't know how, I'll tell you how it works in New York, and you tell me how it works in Boston. Normally, after closing hours, these will generally start in the rear, right? So it's imperative. We get two things that have to happen. One of the firefighters and maybe another firefighter need to get to the rear to see what's going on in the rear. Another firefighter and maybe 2 firefighters need to get to the roof and check out what's happening up on the roof. And we need to get those reports because, most fire departments, we advocate for the chief to do that 360. Well, in Boston, New York, Chicago, Philly, wherever, bigger cities, we don't have that luxury. Like, I don't have time to walk around this big building and leave the front of the building. That's what I got truck companies for. How do you feel about that, Erik?
Yeah, and I 100% agree with that statement. And for me, one of because I one of the first assignments my aide would have is to get to the rear if you can, and give me an update. Then we'll go from there. I know everyone up here. I don't want to say we have a standardized aid procedure, but I do personally. And my thing is get to the rear if you can. Give me an update. I trust my aide; he's an experienced person. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Also, truck companies. So, in the particular this because the L, I would probably get on the air and tell fire alarm to have the second truck come a different way because if they come their normal way, the truck will be pretty much useless because it'll be under the bridge. So, and with this, one of my concerns, and I'm sure you have the same with these buildings, is right away I want to know is it in the basement, the ground floor, or the cock loft? Because to me that changes a lot of some of your tactics.
Mm,
If you get in there and you find out it's a basement, nasty job. Um, we every engine we have has foam capability, although I don't believe we have high expansion. To me, these were perfect fires for tower ladders, in my opinion. Um,
right.
and as a
Well, one,
chief,
yeah,
let me just say one thing. I'm concerned because
right.
I really would like to know what's under that wooden structure. You see, like that's definitely an add-on from when it after it was built.
Yeah, it's a cornice.
So
Yeah, it
yeah,
acts like it's acting like a cornice.
and I'm really curious because I have some pictures of ones getting done over where they knocked off most of the parapet and then just built a wooden structure hiding the
Right.
mess that's underneath. So that right in this one, I've always been curious what's under that. It's
Yeah.
like wainscoting practically. That's
Yeah.
basically what it is.
So one thing, let's talk about locating the fire. So let's just say we decided to enter on the in the middle roll down. We get the roll downs up. We get the rest of the
Yep.
roll downs going. We're very cautious about our ventilation. We enter and we get confronted by a very high heat condition and heavy smoke. Now,
Hmm.
you may get this report, hey, ladder so and so to command. We have fire on the first floor in the dental area, whatever. Unless you see visible flames, don't give that report because I'm guessing in these stores, there's probably somewhere towards the rear a trap door that goes down into the basement.
It's a
In
basement.
maybe only in one of the stores or maybe all of them, because you got to remember this is considered a one building fire, right? Even though there's
Hmm.
five, or there's three or four occupancies, it's a one building fire. That cock loft is common above it, and
Hmm.
that basement. There might only be one interior entrance to the basement. I don't see any Bilko doors on the outside. But one thing that you have to consider locating the fire, we determine the fire is in the basement, is that we have to stretch enough hose to get to the back to that entrance, and then enough hose to get back up front.
Compared to the front.
So you almost
Yeah.
have to
Front.
double for the engine companies when you size this up. It's not just a quick, oh, I just need 3 lengths to get to the back of the store. You got to consider you might have to get down to the basement and then go towards the Delta side or the Bravo side.
Yeah. Years back, I went to a fire, Taxpayer, and the engine did a great job getting all the way to the back and then all the way to the front. And by the time we got in there, you could hear the the vibra alerts going off. Um, they literally used up most of their air just trying to find the basement entrance and getting all the way up to the front because the main body of fire was in the front of the basement. And
Right.
they did a great job. And somehow we ended up with the line, but we didn't last long either before the masts were going off. And eventually, yada yada, it became a tower ladder job. So I'm always leery, and I want a good report. Is it in the basement? And is there an outside entrance to the basement, or is it just like an interior trap door? Because an interior trap door, depending on volume, obviously, but if it's 2 in the morning and place was closed up and they got a really good significant fire in the basement, I'm just gonna flood the first floor.
Right.
That's what
Now,
I'm gonna do.
another school of thought is from the UL studies, and one of the videos they do, and you could look it up. I strongly suggest you look at these videos. The UL, it's a whole series, and one of them is that let's fight the fire on the same level. But looking at this old school taxpayer, I don't see that we have any ability to enter from the ground
No,
level. So
this
what's going to happen is we're going to have to somehow get down those interior stairs if we want to fight this from the inside.
correct, and usually, like I said, depending on the volume of uh, smoke and then everything. I mean, I was always told give the boys a chance, and things don't start getting better. Then hey, it is what it is. You know what I mean? I also
Mm.
find that um, with a lot of these, obviously the owner don't put too much money into the buildings. They expect the tenants. Running a brick and mortar business now is so expensive. So how much are they gonna spend? Um, and this, I'm always been curious what it was originally, because if you look where the grates don't go all the way to the ground, that's newer brickwork. So I wonder if at some point it was like one store, maybe two, little
Yeah.
supermarket or something.
Well, that brick in the front is brick face. It's not structural brick
Yeah.
because there's no headers, so it's just
No.
ornamental.
Yeah. If you click on the first picture,
Okay.
um,
Let me go back.
yep,
Let's see. Hold on. Let me add. Okay. This one. Okay. Yeah.
correct.
Okay. Gotcha.
So this was a taxpayer 2 or 3 in the morning. The main body of fire was on the far corner, like where AD corner. This so the engine in my house, they're waiting for water, and the truck is starting to open up the grates to try to get ahead of the fire.
Hmm.
Similar size, maybe 100 by 40, 50. Right there, they're using the saw, and one of the guys got the Halligan in the lock.
Hmm.
Um, and one difference I will say from when I was a fireman, we only had one saw on the truck.
Right. We have three sometimes. Yeah.
So if sometimes we would get a commercial taxpayer, and you literally had to spend the first couple of minutes changing the blade. We now carry multiple saws, which is a great thing. But you're right. By the time we got into this store, that blade was toast.
Yeah. Well, what's
Um,
a great tool, and I don't think firefighters think of it. That duck bill. If you have just regular case hardened locks like on the
mhm.
outside, the duck bill does wonders. I mean, you just put that bill in there and you smash you get
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you want to get. We talked about this recently. You want to go to the point of least resistance, and a lock is the way to go. I want to just talk about engine ops real quick. So while the engine's waiting, I can't stress this enough. It doesn't matter how the volume of fire. You have to stretch a 2.5 in a taxpayer. That's our SOP in the FDNY, and there's this tendency to think that, well, it's only whatever, it's only a
Mhm.
one room or whatever. But you
Yeah.
really, you have to look at the size of the building and the potential because you know I've seen fires take off from a closet to like a fully involved room in about 30 seconds. So you don't want to be caught short, and you don't want to short stretch either.
Yeah, I personally myself, I if it's commercial, I'm big line only. I don't even want to hear it.
Hmm.
Um, and my officers know that. Um, wood frame, but any kind of commercial, especially at night. Um, yeah, I'm not there to play around. I'm there to be a young Mike Tyson and knock it out.
Hmm.
And I get manpower, but sometimes I've seen some things where smaller departments, and I guess it is manpower. But I'm like, what are you doing with an inch and a half in a commercial? I'll never understand that.
No,
But
you can't.
yeah, I
You can't.
think
That's unacceptable.
yeah, and what I liked about here was so what you can't see is there's already an engine in the truck in the actual fire store, and they're getting ahead of it. So turned out there was a firewall, so a lot of smoke damage, but no fire extension outside of the original pizza shop. And I thought the members did a great job. It was right over the line, so I was actually the RIT chief. I wasn't the IC, and I
Hmm.
thought all the original members did it. They did a great job because when we were coming down the block and you could see it, I was like, "Tower ladder job,"
Yeah,
but they actually did a great job. And I tell you, I think that fire was out in 15, 20 minutes at
yeah.
best, maybe 30. I'm probably
Yeah.
embellishing in the skills, but
All right. One thing, another thing I want to talk about is with truck ops, and something for firefighters to consider is that the ceilings could be 12 feet. You want to bring in, the 6 foot hook is not going to help you. You might want to bring in the 10 foot hooks to get to the ceilings. And another thing to be careful with, like a store of this age, it's probably been around for 100 years. There might be
yep.
multiple ceilings. I know in FDNY, in the New York City by law, you're only allowed to have two, but you know how that goes, right? So
Yeah.
don't be fooled. You have your hook. You throw the hook up there, and you say, "Oh, we got no fire." And meanwhile, the fire is roaring above that second
Oh
ceiling,
yeah.
right? And that's critical. What we really need to know as soon as possible if that fire is in a cockloft, because if the fire is in a cockloft, now we have to rethink our operation, because chances are, once it's in a cockloft, we're really not going to get
Yeah.
it. We're going to have to start looking at the tower ladders.
Yeah. And it's imperative, like when you brought up the multiple ceilings. So I had a fire once where the roof guys were like, "Hey, we got smoke, no fire." Down
Mm,
below, they said, "Oh, it's trapped smoke. We don't see fire." And
mm.
I was just getting ready to start making, all right, all right, all right, no big deal. And I don't know who said it, but somebody said, I think there's multiple in ceilings, yada, yada. Turned out there was still a whole 2 foot gap. And that's where the main body of fire was. And then, it became labor intensive and things worked out. But one thing it's probably not prevalent anymore, and you've probably seen it. So this was an older block like that, the one we were showing. So I made room for the tower ladder, and I said, "Hey, you know, rip the fascia off, because you remember on the really old ones, if you rip the fascia off, it opened right up into the cockloft.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh,
That's right.
it's
Pre
rare now. It's
1920, yeah.
very rare now, but
Yeah.
it was
Pre
something
19.
I
Yeah.
tried. It didn't. It turned out that you couldn't get into the cockloft, but I something that you have to be cognizant of and be aware of, so that in those rare instances with the older ones, you might find out, boom, you open it right up. Because I remember another time years ago, a fire out in Brighton in the block of stores, and this is when I was young and wore size 30 pants. I think I had a 6 foot hook, and I could not, for the life of me, pull down it. Old barroom, it had the tin
Yeah. Oh, the tin ceilings. Yeah, they're rough.
over
Yeah.
uh, black and plaster, and I remember thinking, I got to go back to the gym or something. I literally couldn't get up there, and how
Yeah.
they ended up getting is, the roof guys put holes and ended up sticking a cellar pipe in one of the
Yeah.
holes, because we seriously struggled trying to open up these ceilings.
So let's talk about let's go back to the battalion chief or the district
Hmm.
chief or whoever's in charge. Positioning of apparatus. I'm such a big fan of proper positioning of an apparatus, and I had kind of like a running thing with one of my aides, because I said to him, I said,
Hmm.
if we get this taxpayer, I want to make room for the tower ladders, and I want to make room for the satellite. Like in New York, on a second alarm, we have a special unit that brings the big hose and the big water. I don't know if you have one in Boston, but a lot of times I believe chiefs don't think about the water needs. And if you start supplying two towel ladders, you know, you may very quickly run, depending on the mains, you might be running out of water. You might run away from the water. So what I in a perfect world is, you whack up the building depending on how big it is, like in the front and the side, and where you want to put your towel ladders. But I would also consider supplying those towel ladders, because you're going to need maybe probably a dedicated engine for every towel ladder, right?
Correct. And I'm glad you brought that up. And here's where it's been a little different. So when I was on the tower company at the time, it's the only one the city had. And we had two trucks. We had 95-foot, technically a ladder tower, but it had a pump.
Right. We
And
had
we
two of them
also
in the
had a squirt unit. It was like
Mhm. Yep.
an old engine with a 45-foot telescoping boom, like Philly still
Sure.
buys on engines.
Right.
But they had pumps, so we everyone had assigned position. The rate guy was hydrant guy, et cetera, et cetera. But uh, we've gotten away from that. So whenever you're thinking, okay, I want to get the tower ladder in a good position, right after that, you have to say, okay, I need to find at least one engine dedicated to feeding this tower ladder. And
Hmm.
I would stress that chiefs be cognizant of that, even if, say, you have to hit a second alarm and it's just because you need the engines to assist to feed the proper amount of water.
Hmm.
Because I feel like once you go to outside ops, to me, there's nothing better than a properly supplied tower ladder master stream. Period. End of story.
So Eric,
Oof.
another one of my pet peeves. Let's talk about the actual operation of a towel ladder, right? So you and I both worked on a towel ladder. I was in 17 truck in between 1986 and 1991, and we used it a lot. You know, basically, I felt like every time I was going to work, we were doing something in that bucket. And
Oh,
the funny thing is that the guys that I work with, especially the ones that used to go in the bucket, were the guys that went all through the war years in the South Bronx, and they taught me a lot. And one thing I learned is that, and again, the collapse zone aside, I don't want to, I'm talking about now a
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep.
6 or 5 story tenement. And especially most of the fires, you start at the bottom and you work your way up, and you're putting out floors of fire at the same time. But you want to get that stream up, like up into the ceiling or up into the cockloft, And I see in pictures all over the country on all these magazines and whatever, they post these pictures on YouTube. The towel ladder is up here, and the roof is 30 feet below it, and they're raining on the roof. And
Yeah.
I think that, my theory is, and I remember talking to John Norman about this. I was in FDIC one year, and we were talking about this. I said, the roof is designed to keep water out, right? And if you're pouring water on a roof, you're not really hitting any fire. You really need to get underneath it. And what we would like to do is get that towel out of bucket where it's almost 5 feet off the ground, and aim that stang up into the ceiling. Is that something that you guys? Now I know in Boston you only have two towel ladders. Let's say we have 52 battalions. I want to guess we have like one towel ladder per battalion, right? Like I could think of in the Bronx, the 14th battalion. We used to have two actually, 29 truck and 17 truck were both towel ladders, but we had 17 truck, and the 2-6 had 31 truck. The 1-7 had 44 truck, and on and on. The 18th battalion, 58 truck. The 19th battalion has 46 truck. I mean, so they actually have two. They have 33 truck as well. The 13th battalion has 45 truck. 16th battalion has 23 truck, and it goes on and on and on. So we have basically almost a towel ladder on every box. I know you don't have that luxury in Boston. How do you get around that when you need them?
So what we do now, because what we had, I think at the most we had three. So there's one in each division. We only have two divisions. On a confirmed fire, they're automatically dispatched.
Mm-hmm.
Now, time of day, weather, street conditions. Like sometimes you get to the scene faster than what people think, but other times, middle of the workday or early evening in the summer, it's going to take a minute. So we dispatch them with a confirmed fire, or let's say if the board lights up at fire alarm and they know they got a job, they'll start in one of the tower ladders right away instead of
Mm-hmm.
waiting for someone to call off. The operators have that leeway. When I was on it, um, I work with a bunch of guys that like to work. So if they struck a box and it sounded exciting, we would cheat. We would start heading out, and so mainly. But I have to say, and you got to be kind of cognizant. Like I had a church fire one night, no theater, and this was when I was able to circle the block before I even got out of the car. And when I got out, well, the first thing I said was, I told fire alarm to have the tower ladder come XYZ. I got a spot for them because I thought this was going to lead to a defensive ops. So when the company walked up to me, 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, whatever it was, at first I was like, "Hey, where the hell's the truck?" Behind the three engines that cut us off when we were trying to get in here. So I think it's imperative that chiefs, battalion chiefs, relate to their company officers. When you hear the IC transmit something like that, that doesn't mean you go that way. And that's what kind of happens at times. So I think it's a lot of a command and control issue to position that truck. And I just tried to find it. I should have saved it. I saw it looked like at least one of the tower ladders over the weekend was practicing low level operations.
Mm-hmm.
I should have borrowed the picture. Now I can't find it, but
Yeah.
so it made me kind of smile a little because I'm like, okay, they went out and practiced that. I know both of them do that. Because to me, if you're going to use them in a tower ladder, if you go above it, then you're just doing public relations, in my opinion, because that stream ain't doing nothing.
Mm.
And no, it's probably more so. I don't know if New York still had that problem. I remember reading where people were literally putting steel plating on the roof
Oh
because
yeah.
of theft.
Well, that was
So
when I
going back
came
to
on.
what
It
you're
was
saying is, if first of all, the roof's designed to keep out moisture, and now security is even worse.
right.
So when you go like this, literally, you're just making the people watching feel better. Get down low. We have these blitz gun now. They're just like portable deck guns that you literally could place uh, and walk away.
Yeah,
So you don't need,
we have
because
them in New York. Yeah, the
you
Blitz
remember
Fire.
the old portable guns, right? Those
Yeah,
old portable guns were horrible. Those things they
right.
weighed a ton.
Mm.
So what would you now? You're giving advice to a new BC or acting battalion chief, and he asks you about, hey, where would you put the tower ladder, or where would you think? Would you immediately think of the corners? Would you have already gotten a report? Maybe there's a real parking lot. I know for me, I always tell people, as you're driving around, certain buildings stand out because I know sometimes with those we get creep factor and we forget about the parapet wall.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't there. It was a different group. They had a fire and they literally first thing they did was blow the parapet off, and they did it on purpose
Yeah,
because
for safety.
it was already leaning. But
Right.
then they were able, from what I was told, they were able to get the bucket right almost in the door, and they just
Mm.
destroyed this fire. And at that, they had the squirt, so they used the squirt to do the same thing.
Right.
Um, so I think if you're cognizant, you're aware of it. I just think a lot of places, like some reason, and I can only speak of the south of Boston. A lot of these towns are buying these $1 million tower ladders, and I'm kind of like,
Right. My
why?
town has
Like,
them. Yeah, my
I'm
town.
like,
Yeah, We have one.
Because when
You know,
the rare
yeah,
times they use it, it's from above, and I'm like,
yeah.
what are you doing?
Well, here's something to consider. If you're in a city that has one or two towel ladders, and you're a decent sized department or whatever. One thing that I liked happened back when I was a firefighter, a fireman in the '80s. We used to use the towel ladders a lot, and sometimes if the alarm went to like a second alarm or a third alarm, there was a nice relationship between the chiefs and the dispatchers. So what would happen is, like, the chief's got a lot on his plate. He's losing buildings. He's juggling like 20 balls in the air, and the dispatchers would ask the deputy chief or the battalion, whoever. He says, are there any special instructions for the towel ladder? And I had a job one time, and I'm a bit of a spark, right? So I knew the block. I knew it was all row frames, and I was actually surprised. We had a new civilian dispatcher. It wasn't like one of these old school guys, and I was waiting for that question, but I never got it. And then, sure enough, I got to the street, and the chief is like, looks at me, goes, Danny, get that, towel ladder over on the Bravo side, But I think what needs to happen, if you're next up, if you're in the firehouse and you hear alarm, it's all hands, and it's sounding like, it's starting to go, and you're a towel ladder. I would, now these days you could get Google Maps out or whatever, and you could look at the building, on your computer, and start thinking to yourself, like, I'm a towel ladder, right? Well, I know, one truck is there, they're an aerial. I know two truck is there, they're a tiller. There's no towers on the scene yet. We're probably going to get called to use our towel ladder, and maybe start thinking already, like, all right, well, if we get called, we're going to put it on the whatever, the Alpha Bravo corner or whatever. Well, there's a rear yard, there's a parking lot in the back, and maybe that's where the bulk of the fire. Start thinking about where you're going to position this towel ladder, because you're going to put out a lot of fire with that towel ladder. I think you're flowing, was it 800 to 1,000 gallons a minute? If it's used properly,
Correct.
You're going to put out a lot of fire.
Yeah, we tend to break balls on towers here, but the truth is they're very very great tool. When properly used, like you said.
Right.
Now, let me ask you. See, ours are rear mount. We used to have mid mounts, but ours are rear mount now. And one thing I try to tell people is, when you're positioning, remember, you position the turntable, not the cab.
Right.
Because when I first started driving, it took, even when the guys would say, hey, a-hole, pull up, I would always stop by the cab, just like naturally, like, oh, okay, here, when the truth is the truck was still, 30 feet, 35 feet longer. So I would say position the turntable. I'm sure mid-mount's a little different because it's right behind you.
Right.
So I think you got to use it. If you're going to use it and you decide to use it, the proper water, and then use it. And then I would say control the members who keep, once you decide to go defensive, you always have that company. Give us 2 more minutes, Chief. We got it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, what you don't see, pal, is it's blowing through the roof in the CD corner. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think once you go into that defensive ops, you got to really have some command and control over the units.
Correct. Correct.
And just a really quick story. I remember one night we had a fire, and there was some type of gas explosion. So the house was like crooked. And yet this deputy was like, okay, he held the tower ladder, a couple engines, and the squirt, and sent everybody home. And I shit you not, once we all got in position, that fire was out in 10, 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes now I'll see, like I said, engines blocking out a tower ladder when it's a defensive op. I would say don't be afraid, because now once you go defensive, you're there. You're there. And I've only pulled guys out of buildings a handful of times, but once I go there, in my mind, I'm like, I'm here to relieve. So I could take the 5, 10 minutes to move that engine out of the way to get a better positioning for a tower.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Like,
Well,
'cause-
yeah. Well, here, let me just, I want to just comment on something you said. First of all, generally speaking, a towel ladder operation, we are giving up and we're gonna go defensive now. But it's not to be said that we can't use the towel ladder in an offensive operation. And what I mean by that is I've seen it a few times in my career where we use it to knock down some heavy fire, shut it down, and then move in. So that especially in an occupied building. So that's one thing to think about. You talked about the positioning. Now, if we're going to use the tower ladder, and I always liked it because it was very versatile because you go from window to window. Because remember, you could raise, rotate, and extend at the same time. So let's just say you had multiple people on a fire escape. You want to bring them from one fire escape. I remember one fire we had where JJ was the chauffeur. He's taking people off one fire escape and just putting them on the other fire escape. So the aerial has its advantages too. I mean, but the tower ladder is very versatile. But the one thing you have to consider with the tower ladder, unless it's changed, I haven't been in the bucket in 30 years, or maybe 35 years. But anyway, you would line the bucket up with, because all our tower ladders, was basically what you'd call a mid-mount, right? You want to line the bucket up with the window of the rescue as opposed to lining up the turntable. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about, and I've seen it happen where no one's at the turntable, and we've had fatalities cause of it, a line of duty, is that sometimes things go sideways in a tower ladder, and then the bucket gets stuck. I had a fire one time where two of my firefighters, I was a captain at the time, and we had a heavy fire, and no one was on the turntable. And next thing you know, the bucket's frozen, and they're getting shellacked. The fire's blowing out the window onto these guys. So, the turntable, the chauffeur on the turntable should be able to override that with we call it the dead man pedal, and then he could move the bucket. So that's something else to think about. As far as the operations itself, if you're going to use this kind of semi-offensive, semi-defensive operation, I had a job where I came in I guess I came in on a second alarm I was a sector, a top floor sector. And one thing I learned, when you're pouring a lot of water into a building, you got to watch for the runoff. Like if there's no water running off, where's it going? So I get to the top floor and there's like puddle, like maybe a 6-inch deep, water on the floor. And, think about 6 inches of water on a top floor, the weight, right? Water weighs
correct.
8 pounds a gallon, right? So one of the tricks, and guys looked at me, I told them, I said, go into the bathroom, take your axe and smash the toilet bowl. And they went into all the apartments and they smashed the toilet bowls, and then the water, it ran down, and we were able to reduce the level of the water on the top floor. But that's one thing that we have to consider. I know that if you got a heavy fire and you're pouring water into the top floor, most of it's going to turn into steam. But after a while, once the fire starts getting knocked down, we have a tendency to just kind of overdo things, and we just keep the towel ladder going, and the water just keeps accumulating. And then you might have a potential for a localized collapse, something to think about.
Yeah, I think you just said something made me laugh because I can think of a story. Like we have one, and the breeze started coming out the window, but like the waterfall. Oh
Yeah.
shoot! Now, fortunately, this was wood frame, so we ended up using the bucket and just opening up under a couple windows,
Right.
and it acted like you were flushing the toilets.
Sure.
But you're right. I think you forget how much water you're flowing real quick. And everyone should be aware, but as a chief officer, you should be really thinking about, where's this water? If I don't see it coming out, then that's not a good thing either. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Think about using it like for a furniture store or a commercial occupancy, and there's like bales of like fabric or beds or whatever, that water is going to be absorbed into those into those items,
Material, yeah.
whatever they are, and it's just going to increase that live load is going to go from like because I think for a multiple dwelling, I think they're rated for 40 pounds per square foot. That's the code, I think, for let's say so 40 pounds per square foot. So if you have a room that's 10 by 10, that's 100 square feet, right? So you could exceed that very quickly. I can't do the math in my head.
Yeah, yeah.
40 times 100. You 4,000. That's 2 tons. You're gonna exceed 2 tons if you're flowing a towel ladder very quickly. You know.
Yeah, no, you brought up something about like offensive kind of, and I don't know about New York. Our buckets have a standpipe connection in the bucket for that option to run a line off of it.
Oh, we used to do that once in a while for vacant.
Um,
We put an inch and a three-quarter
yeah,
on the stang. Yep, I've seen that done.
in the and didn't use it much as a firefighter, and it seemed like every time I used it, I was driving, so I was on the pump. But the only
Yeah,
thing I would say maybe an overhaul, because once you do that, you kind of take away the versatility of the bucket.
sure.
So, but I do think it's an option to have. And one thing the newer ones have, and you just must have it, is they have like I call it the sprinkler under the bucket. Like we didn't have that when I was a fireman, but I see now that most of them come with the ability to, in case something bad happens and fire blows out, is like sprinkler heads under the bucket. I don't know how else to describe it.
Hmm.
Or that could just be E1. I don't know. But yeah, I think the positioning, being aware how much, and also don't be afraid to say, "Hey, chief, we ain't hitting the fire anymore, or the fire's out and shut down." I
Yeah,
think terminating tower ladder operations is a much more difficult decision for some people than others. But you got to know when to say, "All right, that's it, we're done."
right. Here's something to think about. So let's talk about the actual operation of the bucket. Now, it was a long time ago. It's 35 years ago. That's more than half my life ago. But one thing that you could I can remember is that when you're in a I mean, I've taken some of the biggest beatings I've ever taken was in a bucket, and because we had I hate to admit it, we had a policy that you really we didn't wear an air pack in a bucket. But this is 35 years ago, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Almost 40 years ago. So it was like old school, and that's how we were. And there were times when the wind shifted, and you would be in the middle, like you could not see the hand in front of your face, and you're flowing this towel out of. You're flowing this master stream. One thing to that you could rely on is like the sound. So like let's say you're moving from window to window and you hear like you hear the splash, it's like a splash sound. Well, you hit a wall. But then you move over and then you hear like this kind of drum, like this hollow drum noise, then you're in. Then you're in the window. And that's because sometimes yeah, quite honestly, you're in the bucket, and once the heavy part of the fire is knocked down, and now you just like you just said, you're trying to wrap this thing up, but you're still flowing 800 gallons a minute, and you're still hitting pockets of fire. You know, you may not be able to see. So you might have to rely on your
yes,
on your
yes.
sound, on the sound.
And I think I told you the story last time. I don't know if we did it in the episode, but back in it was June of 1990 at this fire, and I moved the bucket when I couldn't see, and I took out the pole. No, nobody got hurt. I never admitted to the damage I did to the truck, but
Mm,
I remember telling myself, you know, use your head better. Like you
mm,
move this because somebody down below was screaming to move it, but I couldn't see. I was waiting for the wind to shift, and I should have waited,
yeah.
regardless of the smoke. But luckily, no one got hurt. And minimum damage to the signboard. Yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. Like, because especially sometimes you notice when you first get water, uh, and you're hitting in between the windows, and there's nothing more embarrassing because even lay people start yelling, "Hey, do they know what they're doing?"
Hmm.
So it's a good idea to like I wish we've been gentrified so much. I wish we still had some vacants just to
Right.
practice, instead of
Yeah.
just all this theory. But
Right.
I believe, like if I was in charge, we'd probably have like 5 of them, personally
You
myself.
should
But
honestly, Boston should have more tail ladders, but you should have one per district. But that's just my
yeah,
opinion. I don't want to
that's
start a fight with Boston. I
yeah,
don't have any right to say anything. So here's the
that's
last
how
thing I
I
want.
feel.
Here's the last thing I want to talk about. And I never really got to. I got to do it one time. So, and I don't know if this would apply in how many cities this would even apply in. But in New York, in some of the bigger H-type buildings, right, you have the parapet. Below the parapet, in the cockloft area, we have what we call like these cockloft vents, right? And then you have the top floor window. So a lot of
Mhm.
times now, the fires actually start in the cockloft, right? The wiring, whatever, it gets going, and boom, it takes off in the cockloft. So we had this one fire. It was like basically one of my last fires working. It wound up going to like a ninth alarm, and I had 44 truck in the back. And I said, I knew the chauffeur, this guy, the guy in the bucket, Smitty, he was a senior man. I'm like, Smitty, I want you to take that nozzle and put it right into that cockloft vent. So you'll see them once you start seeing them. I don't know if you have them in
Mhm.
Boston, but once you start, you can't not see them. And they're a double-edged sword because the cockloft vents will continue to feed fresh air into the cockloft, but at the same time, if you didn't have them, then it's sealed off. But why not use it to our advantage? So I would love, I've told this to like a few captains, and I said, listen, if you ever get a fire, try this. I don't know if anyone's ever done it, but
Yeah.
look at it next time. I don't look around in Boston. I don't know if you have them, but there's that they're just vents that go horizontally into the cockloft. I always wanted to try it. Like I only did it once. But I wish I had thought of it earlier, but I never got around to doing it. So anyway, so we're just almost about out of time. Any final thoughts on taxpayers or tower ladders?
um,
Wrap it.
More so for like command and forgive me, but I was just thinking about today's reading about being on a boat in a storm.
Yeah, yeah,
Everyone's panicking,
yeah. That's right.
and the man says basically, relax, calm down,
Take it easy. I know.
take it easy.
Yeah,
And that would be my final statement to any
right,
BC, DC, or whatever they're called is
right.
take a deep breath, relax, remember your experience, what you know,
Yeah,
and make the best decision with the information you have and learn from it. That's it for
yeah,
me.
yeah. That's some great advice. So yeah, my final thoughts. Yeah, just with the tower ladder, I would say again, it begins right with size up.
Mhm.
Give a good report. If you're an engine company or a truck company, try to. You're the first one on scene. Get on that radio. Engine one to command to dispatch. We got a fire, and just tell it what you see. We have heavy smoke, coming through the roll down gates. We have visible fire. Like paint that picture and give a good description of the building. It's a one story, 100 by 100. So this way, the chief, he may not be there for a few minutes. He could start thinking like,
Correct.
oh crap, maybe I need another tower ladder, or I need a satellite unit, or I need a second alarm. Who knows? But
Correct. Correct.
really, these things with taxpayers really we have to get ahead of it because let's face it, they're basically going to come in sometime between midnight and 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So because these things,
Always.
just think about this, and I'll end with this. They're calling the fire department because they're finally seeing it. So how long has this thing been burning unnoticed? Probably could be anywhere from an hour to like 2 hours. So
Correct.
you know, you have to give, you have to take that in consideration, the length of time, and this has probably been burning for a long time. This is why I would say during the daytime we don't lose many taxpayers, because we get to them pretty early. But after closing time,
yeah,
and it's always the telltale, right? You also get them at like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. When
morning.
the first one opens up the store, they open it up and it's like, whoa, So
Oh yeah.
time of day is important. Yeah. So, all right, Eric. Well, I think that's all I got. We'll wrap it up, and until then, we'll see you again on the radio, and be safe out there.
Yep.
All right.
Take care.
Take care, Eric. Thanks for being here.
See you.
All right. And recording. All right.